Have you ever wondered where the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment and acted from that place? Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your host, Brian Berneman, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world. We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers. From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and I have the pleasure to be joined all the way in the US in Washington State by Jenny Morgan. Thank you so much, Jenny, for taking the time to be here. And lovely to reconnect after quite a while. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. For anyone that is listening, we have talked a lot in before about understanding conversations and empathy and finding common grounds or different ways of exploring how to go into different conversations and different spaces that perhaps are challenging. So before we get a little bit into all of that, I would love it if you can share a little bit about you, what has been your journey so far and why are we talking about this?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to have this conversation as well. I have always enjoyed community, and I would say that that's the common thread of everything I've always done. Even when I was a kid, I always liked to put together groups where people would hear music or get everyone to come over to our house to practice a magic show and, just things of getting people excited about engagement and connection. And as I grew older, I began to translate that desire into my career path. And so I have always been very active in engagement that was in the tech industry, in the tech space. I was leading a team where we helped create a more inclusive experience for developers and those that are either entering into or hoping to remain in the tech realm. I also helped manage portions of a nonprofit and how they engaged with youth and getting people more educated about tech skills. And so I really became very inundated in DEI and equity. And that then made me really curious about climate work because they're so interconnected. And as I started to grow my expertise in sustainability and climate action, I began to see more and more this need for us to gain better understanding of one another. And I think that all comes with community and that connection and making sure we continue to respect that. And so I ended up writing a book about making sure we are not using shame as a mechanism for change, but that we're actually inviting others, no matter what their political ideology is or their religious faith or the group that they've identified with, put all of that aside. How can you create an engaging conversation that respects humanity? And so that's why we're talking.
So beautiful. I feel a lot of times it's so interesting in our own personal, journeys, how we get to different understandings and how we start to see, this perhaps is not the approach that is going to be more beneficial for everyone involved. On that approach, perhaps, it could be a little bit more kind in the way that I'm communicating. I feel like in my own path, I came to realize a lot that the more that I understood myself and the more that I started to understand others, how to engage, as you're saying, with others as people, regardless of their views, their conditioning, their places of belonging, and how can we and how can I start to bridge those gaps that seem to be like completely separate and how can we actually have some common places to understand, in the space of sustainability or social change or climate change. Those are big things, and most people have their own relationship with that. And it's like, okay, in very charged situations or emotional situations, how can we find those spaces to meet, as you're saying, as people, and to see, how can we have conversation? How can we actually find those common grounds to then see, okay, what's the way from here?
I completely agree with that. And I love what you said about connecting and exploring yourself, because I think the only way to see others is if you can truly see yourself. It doesn't mean that you have to have everything figured out, but at least you've taken the time to understand how you act in the world based on your own experiences and how that influences your actions every day. Once you start to see that dynamic and find a safe place to explore it within yourself, you'll then start to see everyone else is bringing a similar amount of emotional breadth and experiences and trauma and viewpoints. All of these things are built into just one interaction typically, and we don't often get to see everything else behind just a person that we see on the screen or at the supermarket or however we engage with someone. And so I love that you highlight the importance of knowing yourself, or at least being open to the fact of knowing yourself, which will then open up doors to knowing others.
And I think that there's, for me, a lot of times, and especially the last few years, I have seen, especially since the pandemic times, I have seen a little bit more polarization, which I understand it completely from a place of understanding and working with trauma. We develop mechanisms of survival. So the more that we understand that as people, and as you say, if I understand my ways, my tendencies, my reactions, and then I can see this for others, it's completely normal for us to, try to survive in our own way, however that looks like, even if that's perhaps not taken into consideration everyone. Because I think that this is one of the challenges that we have nowadays, that is, majority of people, most of the time, as we live unconsciously, we are trying to survive, and those that are trying to survive, they don't have the capacity to think, oh no, I'm not going to do this because this other person over there, that might not be beneficial for that person. No, I'm trying to survive. So I think that a lot of times it's for those of us that we are fortunate to be a little bit more conscious and be more aware, what are we doing in terms of that, to find, that humanity in all of this, and to bring that humanity back into the conversations.
Yeah, and I think what's really important to bring forth is trauma doesn't have to be this huge experience that is going to shock or be incredibly disruptive. It's very personal. It can be those things, but it can also be something that has just shaped your reality. And so it's caused disruption in some way, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be some, enormous moment that you're going to write a memoir about or something. And so I think that's one thing about being curious and being conscious of yourself, is that that's something we should all be doing no matter what our history is. And if we can be a bit more intentional in understanding how our viewpoints have been shaped, that can then allow for us to open them up a bit more. And so kind of going backwards in time to understand the present is really important, no matter what your experiences have been.
Yeah, and I'm just like becoming aware of. I had this experience many years ago. I went with a group of vegan activists to an activation. I don't know. They were, going to outside of a rodeo to protest, and that wasn't, and it's still not my way of doing things. But I thought, I had never actually been in a protest. I'd like to see how that is. So I went with an open mind to that space, and I remember that at one point there were these farmers going in there, and some of the people that were next to me started to shout at them and blaming them for all of these different things, and like they should stop their animal agriculture and this and that, which, I mean, not that what they were saying I was against. It was just how they were communicating that. And when those people, they just went on their way into the rodeo, and I asked these people that they were shouting, I asked them, what solution did you give this person? Because that's their livelihood. And I might not agree with their livelihood, but that's their livelihood. What solution did you give him instead of just blaming him for what he's doing that perhaps he's not even aware of what he's doing, perhaps because that's just what he does, or even if he's aware, perhaps he doesn't have a solution to change that. So I found that really interesting in terms of, that space, how it was that, they didn't get through to this other person, not only because they didn't give them a solution, they were just shouting, basically. And I thought, perhaps, like, and I know historically protests actually somehow they do have a place, but what they did for me was like, well, that's not the way. I much rather go and have a conversation and try to understand why they're doing what they are doing, how they are doing it, and is there a different way based on where they are and what might be bringing into the conversation.
Yeah, I hear a lot of fear in that, and lack of safety, and lack of or fear that there might be a lack of compassion. I think those that have that type of visceral reaction to things happening in the world, whether they're valid or not, I too would not want to attend that event. But I think that when we are feeling the enormous pressure of living in a reality that we don't agree with, it creates a sense of insecurity, fear. We don't feel safe. There's confusion. And when we feel those emotions, the easiest or more topical emotion to then access is anger. And when we use anger and shame as a tactic, it doesn't satisfy deep down the fear that we're holding inside of ourselves. And it also doesn't achieve the end result that we're hoping for. So it ultimately ends up being a lose situation for most of the times that I've seen it as a tactic that's been tried. And I think that this is the case with a lot of very polarized conversations. You look at the fossil fuel industry, where there are individuals that are very frustrated by the amount of power that this industry has over our entire world and economy and livelihood and national security. And I mean, everything is intertwined with the fossil fuel industry, and that is an enormous system to take on. And so with that magnitude, the easiest emotion to access is anger and denial and rejection and throwing items on things, and having that type of explosive passion. And I see it on the other side, where there's individuals that grew up, their parents were in this industry, they pay their bills with their livelihood that they've selected. It's all they've known. They live in a town that's filled with oil and gas people, and the fear of being the villain in the story, the fear of having to change their entire livelihood for skills that they don't even have right now. Their whole life is built around this industry. Both are operating from a place of fear. Therefore, they won't ever be able to have a conversation that leads to a positive outcome. And so I think exploring yourself and understanding where your fear comes from and trying to break that down and really understand that, so that you can be more conscious of it when you're coming to conversations, and also seeing that fear displayed on the quote unquote other side of the conversation, and being empathetic to their story, whatever that might be. You can then start to actually come together as a team, and the obstacle is changing our energy source while everyone still thrives in the process. What does that look like? What are the obstacles? You can actually start to dissect. Oh, it's the transition, it's battery storage. You can get really specific on what is causing the blocks, and then start to break them down together, versus it being a contentious type of conversation.
Yeah, and I think that, bringing this perspective of, empathy and compassion, and I love the framework of nonviolent communication as well. To bring this, we actually need to see each other as people, and we need to take the time to explore that. I had this in the last few years, a lot of times in some conferences, and as well in my classes at university. A lot of times, I remember last semester that I was teaching, and the first class, I just asked people to introduce themselves and to, share about them and their life and what they want and how they see things. Because if not, there's no way to find, as you're saying, that knowledge of like, they are also, having this fear, or they are also having this point of view, and now we can meet each other there. And what's been really fascinating is that a lot of times, especially in conferences, I have found this, because, for university, I have the entire semester to teach. But in a conference or in an event, it seems as if there's no time to do that. And like, that's what I've been told a few times, like, we don't have time for this. We need to get right into things. I'm like, well, but those things don't work, because again, we are coming from very different points of view. So all that we're seeing is the obstacles without the solutions. So this is clearly not working. How can we use this other tool of getting to know each other, which, yes, takes more time and more space? And for those that a lot of times are in the climate space, they, and I've been told, I'm also in that space, but a lot of them have told me that we don't have the time. We already run out of time. And I'm like, yes. And also, if we keep on doing it this way, we're going to run out of more time.
Yeah. I think about time, a lot of time. I think that because we come to relationships assuming that we already don't have time, we fill in so much behind the scenes that we've not actually taken the time to verify or validate. And so I talk about climate tribalism a lot, and this could be applied to all types of groups and how we identify with just one word. So if you are a Democrat or a Republican or a Christian or a Muslim, or you identify what nationality you represent. A lot of times that one word, whatever it might be, allows other people to then just fill in the rest of the story. And that can be vastly different. All 5 people could hear, "Hi, my name is Jenny. I live in Washington." And they've then started to build a story in their minds based on Pacific Northwest in the United States. Okay, we've got, starting to really build a story without ever asking me who I am, where I came from, what do I value, what's my daily life look like. And so that space that we require to actually form a conversation, yes, it does take more time. But for me personally, I would much rather spend my time knowing that it will produce a result, or at least have an opportunity to produce the result I want, versus just going out and doing the same thing over and over again without any results. And I mean, that's the primary goal of having conversations like these, is asking ourselves, is my current way of thinking and behaving when it comes with others, especially others that I don't view as quote unquote like-minded, is that producing the result that I want? And if it's no, then we should take the time to explore what could we do better to then improve that. And in the United States, I mean, you see that politically so much right now. And it even just one identifying word can just break a conversation and stop it, when there's so much more behind that. And so, yes, it does take more time, but me personally, and I think everyone really agrees with this, that we want to spend our time doing things that actually produce what we want, rather than just running on a hamster wheel.
Yeah, and you've shared a few words that I would like for you to explore a little bit further. So I'm just going to throw the words at you and use them in conjunction or separate. So fear, shame, and empathy.
Yeah. So fear to me is feeling unsafe, and that to me is an experience where it can lead to a lot of different behaviors. You can lash out and fight. You can freeze and go inward. It's something that doesn't allow for freedom, because if it continues, you could potentially be unsafe. So it's a feeling of insecurity to the extreme, or even just, limiting your ability to have a conversation. And then shame is when you are making someone, either yourself or another person, you are making someone feel bad about themselves. So you're making an aspect or a characteristic about something embarrassing, shameful, wrong. And I mean, you can look at, child rearing and how shame does not work. It doesn't work for children, and it does not work for adults either. It definitely doesn't work for systems. It's using itself against itself, thinking that will then inspire change. And then empathy is, in the way that I'm using it, is recognizing that everything is unique, and coming to conversations and others with curiosity, versus thinking that you already know everything. And so it's really understanding, being open to understanding, and recognizing that a lot of us are very similar, and we just are living in different realities. But acknowledging that and being open to that, and actually celebrating it, because if you come to those conversations with understanding that all of us have something in common, it really allows for connection to occur much faster and easier.
Yeah, thank you for that. A lot of times I think that it's important to really explore what we mean with words, just as you were mentioning before, like a label for someone, we might think, that's what they mean, without really understanding, that's actually what they meant. And and I think that a lot of times for me with this, and this is important to understand about the human experience, as you're saying, we all experience things. Whether those things are big events or small events, if we are unable to be present and process them, which is majority of the time, that is what creates trauma. That is what then we develop mechanisms of survival. That is then how we develop our tendencies and our habits and our actions. And depending on how we have been living in our life, we are conditioned to certain belief systems or certain patterns, and therefore we start to create all of these things but that's a commonality. Like, it seems like we are like creating more separation, but that's a common thing. Like, how that is, perhaps, yes, or the view that develops, then that is what's different. But there's this tendency of othering instead of creating this unity. And for me, a lot of times, in the way that I'd like to see the world, both from more, all of the spaces that I'm really into, like both the more human, spiritual, emotional, like health perspective, and the sustainability, climate action, all of these spaces, for me, the thing is, we're all together on this. Like, and the more that we keep on separating and othering and blaming and shaming and all of these things, we're not going to come to a solution because we keep on separating. Like, there's only this one thing, like this one earth here with, the resources that we have, with the people that we have. And if we keep on creating separation, that's not going to solve all of it. If we keep on putting things to the side, well, they are on the side still. They don't disappear. They are just on the side. So it's really important to be able to create that capacity that we have, that a lot of times throughout the podcast, I have talked about the importance of empathy and how empathy is a superpower. Because when we understand that, then we can show up and then we can actually feel and be compassionate and be kind and understand each other instead of creating this separation, which is then by coming together, how then we, hopefully do things in a way that is supportive of everyone and everything.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear your perspective about language, because I think if you take the word empathy, I mean, that was just my definition of it. And I think everyone has slightly different definitions. Even at times, I feel like our language can be a disruption to our experience, because even just the word empathy, there could be a perception that it's too emotional and not realistic and idealistic, and just there could be a lot of negative perceptions around I lead a life that's empathetic, and saying something like that. Some could even feel threatened by that it's a form of virtue signaling, that I'm better than someone else because I feel more things, or I'm kind, or, and so I'm curious what you feel when you are talking to others about empathetic values and connection and being conscious in action. Do you think that can be misconstrued or even threatening?
Definitely. And this, again, this is why we need to create the time and the space to further explain things. And as you're saying, we have a tendency not to do that. So, language as a tool is amazing. And knowing plenty of languages, it's a really challenging thing a lot of times to explain something, already in a different language. Sometimes, I need to say something to someone in Spanish, and it's like, and I know this word in English, and it's like, it's not the same in Spanish. Like, the same word doesn't exist or doesn't, feel the same way. So already a lot of times language can be a barrier in terms of our understanding. And this is why, for me, it's so important that we develop as individuals, that we develop our capacity for feeling. Because even though feeling, it is more nuanced, feeling, it is something that if we can actually, be here and we can feel into this conversation, into each other, then we might not need the words. And that is a lot of times how we come together. This is why, in terms of empathy, for example, for me, empathy is more of the capacity that we have, and I love the word that you use of curiosity, to put ourselves in other person's shoes. Beyond that, for me, the difference perhaps with a lot of people is that for me, compassion is the one that actually has the feeling component. Empathy doesn't really have much of a feeling component. It has much more of an understanding and a projecting. Whereas compassion for me is the one that I can feel. I can feel your suffering. I can feel what you're feeling. And because of that, and this comes from a Buddhist perspective, this is where I came with this understanding of these words. Therefore, if I feel it, I am moved to act. When I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes, perhaps I might do something or not. That for me, and again, for some people, what I mean about compassion, that's what they think empathy is, or it can be a completely different thing. But it is really interesting a lot of times how when someone has that capacity, as you're saying, it can be seen as a negative. And it can be seen, I was actually talking the other day with one of my clients, that she was talking about how in the office she had to learn to, in a sense, not be as emotional. And I'm like, well, that perhaps is not, a supportive space for you to actually explore you as a human being, because most corporate spaces, they don't want that. They don't want, a lot of times, not every place, but in general, what I came across is that they prefer things to be done without the emotions or the feelings behind. They just rather get things done. And it's like, well, like, your stuff, how you're feeling, just leave it on the side. And I was telling her, well, now you need to unlearn that all of those emotions are a negative thing, and you need to, perhaps in other spaces, start to find again that safety for you to be able to explore that. But this is why all of this is so challenging, because this is so nuanced and this is so different for all of us. And, all of the challenges that we have seem to be so big all of the time, which make things a lot of times even worse, because that brings about, as you're saying, all of those fears for everyone. So yeah, I think that for me, in terms of those ways and understanding language, it is a really, really important thing to dissect as much as possible. What do we mean when we are saying this, and having an understanding, and from the framework of nonviolent communication, if I say something, the other person actually responds, what I understood is this, then there's even more of an understanding. Actually, yes, you understood what I was meaning. Or no, actually, I didn't mean it that way. Let me try to rephrase it to see if we can actually get an understanding.
Yeah, I think that there's so much behind intention and the understanding the priority and the value and everything that comes behind a word, I think, is really important. I talk a bit about dichotomous thinking, that all or nothing, black and white type of thinking. And I think that this can apply to language as well. But being comfortable with emotion and also being comfortable with things not being clear. And emotion is a perfect way to describe that. A lot of times, even now, I have 2 young kids. We're taught to help as parents to teach them to identify their emotions, which is fantastic that we're talking about it. But at times it's still identifying one emotion so that you can put one piece of language to that one primary feeling. But when are we ever experiencing just one emotion? And usually the emotion is that we think it is only the one that's easiest to show. Maybe we're not sad at all, but we're crying because our body is reacting to a complex soup of emotion. But then, we're crying because that's our physical reaction to everything that we're feeling. And so, yeah, I think coming to our feelings and coming to our emotions, and being comfortable with emotion, but also being comfortable with complexity and the gray between the black and white is so important in all aspects of understanding ourselves, understanding others, helping push impactful movements forward, being comfortable with that limited just one definition, and actually celebrating that is a skill, but it can really move things forward in a way that's very positive.
Yeah, and what you're just mentioning about the feelings and emotions, it's so interesting because I remember when I started studying Buddhist psychology and philosophy, that there was these tables of all of these different feelings and emotions, and it was kind of like, okay, so there's this primary, as you're saying, these primary emotions. Inside of each of them, there's like 10 different classifications of each of them. So perhaps, as you're saying, instead of being, sadness, it's not sadness, it's, like anguish, or, it's grief. Inside of each of them, there's more. So there were all of these classifications, and then my teacher was like, well, those are just for the mind. Like, we don't even need the words. And the thing is that it's what you're saying about, teaching your kids, or kids in general, the emotions. One of the issues that we have as well with that is that once there's an emotion, and this just comes with time and repetition, when there's an emotion, usually that comes with a specific reaction. And now, once we start to actually become aware of that, we stop feeling the feelings and we just go into the reaction, because it's like, this is sadness or this is anger. That's it. There's no need to actually process that, which creates even more trauma, which creates even more blockages and creates more distance between us and our experience. So, it's such a fascinating space to understand that it is not that easy to have that. And going back to, even as you were saying before, with language or with labels, I tell a lot of times to people, one of the things that I have practiced for now the last 20 plus years has been aiming to become less attached with the labels of who I am, or that I've been given, because, okay, so I grew up in Argentina. I was born in Argentina and grew up in Argentina, therefore I'm an Argentinian. Whatever that means for people, for the collective, which means also for me. I grew up with a specific religion, so therefore I am that. I grew up with a specific ethnic perspective, so then I'm from that ethnicity. Therefore, all of these ideas. And it's so interesting, I remember when I was living in the US, being Hispanic was such a different thing than being the same ethnic group here in New Zealand, or back in Argentina, or when I was in Europe, depending on what that group is seen as, then I was seen as that. And it was such a fascinating thing. But then I have my own understanding on those labels. So therefore, there's this gravitation to people that are from the same labels because we feel this need to belong. But perhaps, I have found through the years, there's a lot of Argentinian people that I have found in all of the places that I lived, and suddenly it's like, oh, they actually don't think the same way that I do. Like there's a lot of values that I have developed through the years that have nothing to do with the typical Argentinian, and again, generalization. But then with some others, then it's like, oh, yes, with this person, yes. So we can find common ground. But it's such an, intricate experience, the human experience, and what we are going through now, and the way that we have so much information as well, and how, what do we believe? What do we believe is so important? Where are we sourcing our information from, and then how do we experience that, and how does that matter for us in our life? I'm here in this house, and how come does it matter what's happening on the other side of the world? And it's so complex, all of this.
Yeah, I think we are very much so encouraged to have an opinion, voice that opinion, and then assign ourselves to the group that also has said opinion. And I stress a lot in the frameworks of more of a motivational type of conversation where you are motivated to understand one another and explore each other's perspectives and have it be open-ended. I talk a lot about how we can formulate opinions about the values that we want to uphold and see in the world, and be very intentional in making sure that you don't then assign a label or a lack of value to a group just based on that word that you've blended with a value. A lot of times we will attack an individual or a group rather than disagree with a value. And it's still okay to have an opinion and to embody various values that how you live your life. That protest that you attended, it's perfectly fine that group feels like they need to put power and voice to a species that does not have power and a voice. Mm-hmm. And I empathize with that goal. However, we shouldn't be attacking those that we haven't even asked the question, first and foremost, but attacking those individuals based on the tribe that they've assigned themselves to, versus us coming to, I want to see this value more in the world that I live in. How can we get there? And trying to have that conversation. And so, it's, again, we get to the concept of time or lack thereof, where it's much easier to just attack a farmer rather than say, we need to find a better source of income that can reduce the amount of pain we inflict on a specific species or something like that. And that takes a lot of time and intentionality and patience and growth. And if you're not open to that, you need to find out what's causing that delay, and then that will empower you to actually create change. You can create whole businesses around that, and whole new communities around it, and ways of thinking. Wanting to be curious and explore the amount of growth that we are capable of is so exciting to me. I think a lot of people are equally excited of how much opportunity and possibility there is once we break down any of those preconceived barriers that we've self-inflicted or that we've misconstrued.
Yes, there, like, This is my view, at least. And a lot of people say that I'm quite the optimistic. I tend to think that I'm realistic and optimistic at the same time, because for me, what's the alternative to be pessimistic all of the time? I don't see how that is helping me, or how is that helping me to focus on finding, coming together and finding solutions. And there is so much potential for change and growth. And this for me is why it's so important for me to explore ourselves as we then explore each other, to be able to work on ourselves, to understand ourselves more, because as you're saying, there's so much more capacity for growth as individuals and as groups of people and as humanity. There's so much potential. And a lot of times I see, like there's so much doom and gloom, and it's like, well, that could be. And also, it could be that we actually understand ourselves better, we understand each other better, and we come to a thriving, people and planet. Why not? If we can think of that other one, why not this one? And this is, as you're saying, this capacity for growth that is there, that is beautiful. And I'm aware a little bit of our time, Jenny. I would love to explore, before we start to wrap up this conversation, a little bit more about your book. What prompted you to write the book, and a little bit of what's in the book for people to actually realize.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with what you're saying about being an optimistic realist. As I've been talking about the book and people have read it, and then they've come back to me and given me their thoughts and their feedback. A lot of times people have called me an optimist, and it's a bit humorous to me because I would not have identified myself as an optimist, especially before writing this book. And I think the main reason why I've had people that I talk to come to that conclusion is because I too think that having a positive mindset is the answer, and that the alternative doesn't work. And I've experienced that in my own life, and I think we can see it in a lot of various forums where we have that doomsday type of news and then positive news. Yes, doom news gets a lot of clicks, but it doesn't get a lot of engagement, whereas positive news might not get as much clicks, but the engagement is strong. And if we really come down to what the goal is, we want engagement, not just fleeting clicks and connection. Real, true, positive growth building connection. And so, the book came from me wanting to have us all utilize our time effectively and be able to really create a world that we all want. I genuinely believe that every single person wants a clean and happy and joyous planet. It's all been muddied up with all of the other things that we think about in our daily life. And so I wanted to give people an opportunity to not only explore themselves, but then find ways to formulate connections, even if on paper you might have originally not had a connection. And then you find out you both like soccer and you both love to hike and your favorite season is summer, and you find out all of these things. And then you've just found out that, wow, this person that represents a very heavily polluting corporation loves nature. Wow, I never thought that I would discover that about that person. And then what does that mean for climate progress? And I've experienced those types of conversations multiple times in my work, where you find out that there's someone that loves nature and loves traveling and experiencing other cultures, but then they would have been labeled as someone that's other than that. And so that excites me, because that means that we have the capacity to not only grow as individuals, but grow as a community. And so that's the reason for the book. I hope to just continue to help others feel heard and then give the others in their community a safe place to express themselves, and then try to find ways to come together to overcome obstacles that humans all experience in various forms.
Beautiful. And where can people find the book?
On Amazon. So see, it's the irony is not lost on me. Yes, it is on Amazon, and it is in local bookstores in the Pacific Northwest. I can also provide it locally from my website. If you go to cancelcultureandclimate.com, you can email me and I can send you a copy as well. It's actually going through the whole writing process has been very interesting too, to understand the systems that authors experience and what that's like. And so, yes, there's a website. I'm very active on LinkedIn, Jenny Morgan, and then my website, and I do host workshops, and I'm open to any form of conversation. I love it. It's why I'm here.
Beautiful. And I think that it's part of our system. Like I say to a lot of times to some of my students and to people in general, like our system is not perfect. We cannot be perfect within the system, and we need to be part of the system if we want to also create the change that we want in the system. Like at this moment, Amazon is one of the easiest ways for people to get books, whether that's on ebook or actual like printed books. And it's like, well, like I might not agree with everything that Amazon does, but at the same time, I want people to get the book. So, we need to, the same with this, I'm using a computer and I'm using internet. Like there's a lot of those things that from a sustainable perspective, it's not great. But if not, then I'm completely disconnected, and the impact that I want to have, it's not going to exist. So, we need to play in this world as well.
Yeah. And just even talking about that, who knows who's now coming up with an idea of how to solve that problem for authors to be able to sustainably get their book available to a global audience, and doing that sustainably and ethically. And, now there's a whole new idea formulating. So, I love progress. I think it's so important, and being comfortable in progress is really important too. So thank you for having me here to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone that has been listening or watching us for this episode. As always, I would love to know, what resonated with you, what didn't, what did you learn, what did you hear that was different, what has been your experience with all of this myriad of topics that we explored during this episode. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Jenny, once more for sharing once again time and space with me, and for sharing all of this experience with all of us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ, so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.